Alright folks, something new to the channel. So I've recently gotten really deep into the RC world. So this is the FMS FCX18 Land Cruiser 80 series. So my wife bought me this for my birthday last month, and ever since then I just kind of went off the deep end and been really obsessed and tinkering with this thing and modifying it. And kind of now I'm really looking into like more dedicated crawler builds. Want to do like a 10 scale Vanquish build, start from the ground up. But anyway, I wanted to kind of go over all of the mods and, cosmetic and some of the performance changes I did on this thing. There's a lot of videos on YouTube, but I noticed there's not a lot of content for these FMS trucks, right? There's not a lot of aftermarket support like some of the other mods, and a lot of the stuff you kind of have to figure out and tinker with it yourself. So I'm going to go over in all the cosmetic changes that I did, as well as, we'll take the body off and look at all the stuff that I did under the hood. So the biggest difference that you'll notice with this truck is the front end, right? So FMS did a great job with the scale realism, but one of the things that really bugged me is how the front end looked, right? So these things come all black with the blacked out headlight buckets. This thing is all clear, which is fine, right? I mean, but I really like how the US spec Land Cruisers look with the chrome grille and then the amber corner. So what I did, I took the whole thing apart, popped the lenses off, and the inside of the lenses were actually painted with this stuff here. So the Tamiya X26 clear orange, so it's a very translucent, very thin paint. Did a couple layers on the inside of the lens, and that gives it a really nice look. Now, in addition to that, painting the grill was painted in Tamiya spray paint, the TS30, which is a silver leaf color. So it's a nice little bright silver metallic finish. And so with the silver underneath and there's translucent orange on the paint for the corner lenses, it really gives them that nice sort of almost like a real corner light, right? Let's see, did a little bit of orange splash there on the side marker lights. The bumpers are Injora aluminum, front and back. Tires and wheels. So these are the Injora W1015s, and the tires are the Injora King Trekkers 62 by 22 millimeters. So I don't really like putting black wheels on, or bronze or gray or anything like that. I really wanted just a nice polished wheel. There was not a lot of options from what I could find in the 1.0 size. So I found these guys. They're not sold on Amazon by Injora like all of the other wheels that they sell. So I had to buy these directly from Injora. They took a couple of weeks to arrive because they came from overseas, but really love the look on them. They have they're a very narrow wheel, so a lot narrower than all the other wheels that they sell. And you'll notice just how narrow they are. So they're very tall wheel, 62 millimeters, but they're very narrow, which means everything sort of tucks in nicely as well, and not a lot of trimming or clearance needed to fit these tires. So on the back of the truck, I did remove the factory spare tire. I wasn't a big fan of how that looked, and just take some of the weight off. I did find this sort of a spare fuel tank. I think this was either from eBay or Etsy, so a lot of folks 3D print those. Got one in a gray color, put a little 18 scale shovel on there. The ladder I did remove and painted it the same Tamiya silver leaf color, and just kind of dirtied it up a little bit, added some other colors, some brown and black in there to make it look like a bit weathered and distressed. Let's see what else along the exterior. You will notice all of the black lines. I filled all those in, so that kind of makes a big difference in adding some depth to the body. So what I used for that is the Tamiya black line accent panel for the panel. So this got a very tiny little tip in there, and the paint is very thin. So basically just dab a tiny little drop in between the panel grooves, and it'll just kind of run its way down. And it's really neat how this stuff works. It just kind of fills in the panel grooves on itself. All right, so on the roof rack again, so as I mentioned, this is a light bar from the Bronco, the TRX4M Bronco made by Injora. Just a couple of 18 scale accessories that I found online, little whatever that thing is, this bag, a couple hard cases, and I do have the 10 scale power tank from RC 4-wheel drive. I really like the power tank. This thing it's really big because it's meant for a bigger truck, so I cut off the big handle on there and just kind of kept the gauges on there. And so I don't like the nets, some of the cargo nets that folks use. So what I did, I actually glued everything in place, so that way I can just keep it in there. I don't have to worry about, when I do a rollover or anything, it'll stay put, which is nice. Now this light bar, in order to fit this thing, it's a little bit wide. And so what I actually trimmed off one of the feet on the side and hit these side rails with a heat gun just very briefly. And you'll see I just kind of barely opened them up. So they got a little bit of a contour there to make it fit. And, everything's nice and snug, and it looks great. I think I was not a big fan of the huge round yellow lights. I think they looked out of place and, a little bit goofy looking. Not really to scale in my opinion, so I wanted something a little bit slimmer and low profile, and that thing worked great. All right, so lights. So the lighting on these things is pretty cool. They got a lot of functions. You got the low beam, the high beam. You got the backup lights. You got the roof mounted lights up on the top. You have the turn signals, which I despise. I get they're trying to do something realistic and unique, but I am not a fan of these turn signal that FMS uses. So basically, every time you turn the wheel, these things start going off and blinking orange, and that's not realistic at all, right? So if you know Land Cruisers, the turn signal is actually these little ones down here, which I painted orange. This is the low beam out here, and this is the high beam from the factory. And this is actually a running light, so your corner light that's always on. And so having this thing blinking every time you turn the wheel is super annoying and not realistic at all, in my opinion. So I pretty much gutted all of the wiring that it came from the factory, right, and redid it all. And so one of the things that I did is I added rock lights and in this roof bar, which are tied together on a separate circuit, which is different, right? And so I actually have a switch in order to make everything work, which is under here, and I'll show you guys that. And so you see that turns on the roof light bar here and the rock lights. So these are the Injora rock lights. Let me show you those guys. So 2 up in the front there and 2 underneath. There you go. And the reason I did that, and you'll get a better idea once we open the truck up, and I'll show you and explain how the ESC works, is a lot of the aftermarket lights that you can find for these trucks, for basically all of these 18 scale RC cars, they require anywhere from 5 to 7 volts to work. The FMS system, the way that all of the factory lights, these are all 3-volt LEDs, so they're running about 3.8 volts on the low beam, and when you set it to high, it bumps it up to about 4.2 volts in the testing that I did. So that was not enough to turn on this thing, this made by Injora, and also the rock lights, because these are all spec'd out. They need at least 5 to 7 volts to work, and so I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on when I was trying to get anything to work, and they just wouldn't turn on. And that's when I pulled everything apart, pulled out my multimeter, started testing the output of the ESC and receiver, and realized that the voltage that they use for the factory lights is a lot lower, right? And so that's why I have these guys and these guys on a separate circuit with their own on-off switch, which I'll show you. So the other thing that I did as well is, while I like one thing I liked is the warm light, the warm white headlights that these guys use, but all of the aftermarket stuff is all in this cool white color. So in order to make everything match, I gutted all of those and did the 4 headlights together, right? So ran all new LEDs. Now they all come on together. There's no turn signal, right? So that's gone. Those are removed. And on the back, I actually added 2 double LEDs, so you'll see there you go. So there's 2 on each side, and these are now a running tail light. So the factory configuration from FMS is that these would only come on as backup lights, if I remember correctly, and so the circuit on these trucks actually has the function for a running tail light, but it is not used in these trucks, right? So there is a pin in there, but it's not used. So again, what I did, I just tied everything together, added a second bulb, and now you have these on at all times. And so the other thing I did is, one little cool, neat little feature is I actually have real reverse lights up here separately on the roof rack. So those are also from Injora, and so I tied those into the circuit that was here before, where it was your backup light, and now under backup, now you see those come on the roof, which is kind of cool. So those are, you can see they're a little bit cockeyed. I'm not too happy how they came out. I tried gluing those in place because I couldn't find a better way to mount them, and as they were drying, one of these kind of sagged on me, so it's kind of a little bit annoying, but maybe I'll fix that at a future point in time. But they work pretty cool. I like them. They give it a nice little look, actual backup lights on the truck. All right, now as far as suspension goes, I am running the 53mm Injora shocks, which are also meant for the TRX4M. They're a little much longer than the factory configuration, and in order to make that work, I did add some 3D printed shock keys, which you'll be able to see again, after we remove the body. And I had to do just very minor trimming, so I just took my Dremel and sort of just ground off the inside of the fender here just a tad bit, and that actually worked out perfect. With this tire size, you can see we get quite a bit of travel. Let me position the camera here. So nice amount of flex before you get the tires off the ground, so you can see how much you get there, and all the tires fit nicely in the wheel wells. No rubbing anymore from the backside. You get, again, quite a bit of down travel. And I'm really happy with the setup in terms of the stability and the suspension flex that you get. It seems like it worked out very well. I actually have it sitting quite low just to keep the low ride height. I also did not like how high these sit from the factory, so these are pretty much riding almost bottomed out. I did use the soft springs that it came with for the front, and on the back I have the slightly stiffer springs with just a tad bit of preload just to level the truck out. As far as steering goes, I did make a lot of changes here as well. So you'll see what I'm actually running there is an NSDRC RS100 micro server. The factory servo, it was still working. I just noticed that it was starting to get bogged down a lot. It was very sluggish. I wasn't really happy with the performance, especially in these bigger tires once you get it bound up in the rocks. So I want to just go ahead and take care of that right now and get that replaced. And this thing is super cool. It's very snappy, very quick, very strong. And then once you get the body off, I'll show you what I had to do to make that thing work. But yeah, very happy with the performance on this little servo. Alright, before we get the body off and look at the internals underneath, just put this thing on my little ramp here to show you the performance with the shocks. Looks like wheels about to lift. So there you go. I mean, you can see quite a bit of suspension travel. Tires are fully stuffed. I can turn them both ways, and you see just barely kisses the inner fender there with the amount of trimming that I did. Oh, fell off there. Let me put this thing back on. See the I don't know if you can see it, but the shocks are pretty much fully compressed at that point. Full droop in the rear. All right, now from the rear. Let's see, it looks like about right there, right before the tires come off the ground. Alright, here's a bottom view of the truck. So you'll notice I do have the Injora body magnet mounts. I'll show you what I did to make those work with all of this weight that I've added to the truck. One thing that you'll notice is different is these two switches here. Alright, so one of the things that I really hated about this truck is having to pop the hood open and turn the switch on and off every single time you want to use it. So what I did is I sort of rerouted the battery cable, coming from the hood over here to this manual on-off switch. So now the switch that's under the hood, that stays fully depressed at all times, and then when I actually want to turn the truck on, I just hit this little guy, and that actually is what turns on the truck, right? So now it's on, and then the other switch up here is for the lights, the rock lights and the roof rack light bar that are all tied together. Alright, so let's take a look at the body off. So again, the Injora magnet mounts are great, but they really do not work well once you add a bunch of weight to these trucks. So when I bought them, as I installed them, pretty much as soon as I would pick the body up, it would just slide right off, right? So the magnets were just not strong enough to work with these trucks when you add a bunch of weight. They might work great when it's all very light plastic, but once you start adding the brass wheels and the brass portal covers and the brass links and all this other stuff, they just do not hold at all whatsoever, right? So now that with the ones that I have, you can see, I can't, grab the truck and shake it around, but it does a decent job, right? I can pick it up, no problem, and they'll stay put, right? And then you just kind of tilt this body part up and off it comes. All right, so this LC80 is actually the new version, the one that had the clear windows with the full interior. I wasn't a big fan of that, right? So I gutted all of that, took the interior out, and replaced it with the tinted windows that came in the earlier models. And so what you're seeing here is all of the revised wiring that I did in order to make all the headlights work. So let me move this over here into the light a bit. So here is the wiring that I ran. So again, we have the double headlights on each side. You can see the wiring comes this way, and you can also see the double taillights that I ran. I don't know if the camera will pick that up. So top and bottom, right, on both sides. And those all come tied together here in the middle. And there's a couple of quick disconnects here, right? So this one here is for the headlights. I have a couple plugs. I just have them color coded so I know which goes where. This is the other one for the roof lag and the rock lights. And then this one is for the tail lights, so I can just unplug everything quickly. The other thing I was not a fan of the stock wiring is just how short the wiring was, right? So it didn't give you a lot of slack to take the body off and, you know, reposition it off to the side. So with this here, I can pretty much lay both side by side and work on the truck without having to disconnect anything, which is kind of nice. All right, first wiring mod is the battery cutoff switch that I mentioned, right? So again, you know, this thing stays fully depressed at all times. And so what I did, normally this battery plug here goes straight into the motor. And so what I did is I actually, you know, got another connection, right? So ran that over here, goes into this on-off switch, and then the on-off switch comes this way and then connects to the motor here, right? So now the battery's going straight into the switch, and that's how I control everything with this switch down here. Instead of having to, you can see there it turns on, instead of having to open the hood and pop that up every time. So turn that back off. So that's what I did for the on-off switch on the truck itself. For the headlights, what I did is I'm actually only using one of the plugs here on the ESC. So all of the headlights, so, you know, both the left and the right, you know, the four headlights that I'm running are running off this single plug here, right? And I will get into a little bit more detail there. The brake lights are running off the factory brake light plug, this one down there, right? Just with a slight couple of modifications. Again, I'll show you which pins I'm using and what each pin does what. The roof lights and the rock lights are running off of this channel 4 plug here, this one right here. So this is the one that's intended for like 4-wheel steering or anything else. But, you know, since I have no plan on running 4-wheel steering on this one, I just use this for the power, because this gets the full 6-7 volts, whatever is required for those other aftermarket lights. Whereas these other plugs, right, so the headlight, the turn signal, the fog light, the brake lights, those all run off of like 3 to 4 volts, and they do not work with all of the aftermarket lights, as mentioned. Now, the easiest way I can explain this versus trying to show you tiny little pins and wires on the ESC itself is to just blow up and print out a copy of the schematic from the owner's manual. This is actually very straightforward and very basic once you kind of spend some time looking at it and understand where the plugs are. You know, all of these pins are fully labeled and tell you exactly what's going on. And, you know, here's the signals that, you know, the channel 3 and the 4 and, you know, for the main servo, the main motor, and then the one you would use for your full receiver. And, you know, everything will tell you exactly what it is, if it's positive, negative, and so forth, right? And so I'll show you exactly what I did and which pins I used and how I made it all work, right? So for the headlights, to run basically all 4 of these headlights on at all times, I am using this top plug that we looked at, and I'm only using 2 pins, right? So the red is the power, and then the green is the negative. So again, if you look at the number 4, so number 4 comes down here as the headlight interface signal. So that's basically what's giving you the signal to turn on the headlights. The red is not labeled here, but it is labeled over here on this side, right? And so you'll see this light gray line is all going to pin number 23. 23 is the channel positive interface for all of the lights, right? So they're all tied together, labeled 23, and you'll see these are all the positive pins, which corresponds with the signal pins. So 7 and 6, for example, your fog lights. Here, I think it was your factory turn signals, if I remember correctly. 8 and 9, what do we got? 8 and 9, yeah. So left turn signal, and you know, those have been bypassed, right? So I'm not using any of those plugs. So I'm only using a single plug for the headlights, and these are the 2 pins that I'm using. For the taillights, I'm using the single taillight plug here. And so this is where it's a little interesting, right? So if you look at the configuration from the factory, so number 19 is the taillight interface. Number 20 is a brake light interface, and then 21 is a backup light interface. So what I'm using is I'm using number 20, which is this second pin here, to have the taillights on at all times. And then number 21, which is this one, is the backup lights that I showed you earlier, the little white lights that are mounted up on the roof rack. So by the factory configuration, these are the only ones that are hooked up, the backup light interface, and those are the ones that come on red from the factory on this thing when you back up. So what was interesting is this one here, this number 20, which is the brake light interface, that pin is not used. That wiring is not used. It's connected in the harness, but it's not connected to anything on the body side of the truck. It's just sitting there empty. Number 19, this one is actually the hazard lights, right? So this is the one that gets the voltage when you turn on your hazard lights with the rest of the blinkers. So the only 2 that I'm using is basically these 2, right? So again, it's number 20 and number 21. And that's how I get the brake lights to work on at all times, right? So the 4 little red lights that we saw here, and then number 21 is the backup lights for the roof. It's pretty simple. Now for the rock lights and the roof light bar, since I mentioned those are aftermarket, which run on 5 to 7 volts, these are all 3 to 4 volt circuits. When I tried hooking up, you know, those rock lights and that roof light to any one of these two, it simply would not turn on, right? Because it was not enough voltage. So I started playing around and looking at the other empty channels, which was this one here. Again, this is your channel 4. And that one normally is used for your 4-wheel steer or rear-wheel steering if you wanted to do that as an option. But again, I don't see myself doing that with this truck. So what I ended up doing is, let's look at the wiring here. So number 22, which is the very top pin of that, is the signal pin, right? So that's what triggers a signal to you know, for whatever it's got to do on all of these, right? So 22 is, I think these are your, what is it, the servo and then the motor. I think the other ones are. And then if you look at these, it's actually reverse, right? So whereas these, the very bottom pin is the positive, right? That we saw here, the number 23. On these guys, it's the middle one, all right? So the middle one is the positive, or the red. And then the bottom one is the number 24, the darker gray. Those are all the negative channel interface, right? So basically what I'm doing is I'm using these 2 pins here, this the bottom one and the top one, to trigger on those rock lights and the roof light bar with the same type of manual switch here, right? So the same one that I'm using for the on and off, I'm using another one for those rock lights right there. And that plug comes from here, right? So this is the one that connects, you know, for all of the rock lights together and the roof light bar. So here you can get another view of the little rock lights where they're mounted. So those are all tied together under this single plug, which all connect here in the spare channel 4, which corresponds to that little guy there, right? And that's how I'm able to make everything work the way it is right now. And so in order to make everything work the way that I wanted to, like I said, I gutted everything, all of the factory wiring, the factory lights from that came with the truck. I bought a bunch of these, right? So these are 3 volt, 3 millimeter LEDs, right? So you can find these in Amazon. You can get a whole pack of 10, 20 for, you know, 5, 6, 7 bucks. And they come in any color, right? Whatever you want. So I got, you know, the cool white for the front, and then I got red LEDs for the back. So I'm using, you know, 4 for the back, and then 4 red for the back, and then 4 whites for the front. So again, 3 millimeter diameter, right? And then 3 volts is what you want in order to replace the factory lights on these, right? So they'll just, the 3 millimeter will just clip right into those little light sockets, and then the 3 volts is what works correctly with the factory ESC output, right? The other thing that you'll need is a bunch of these little plugs, right? And so the little micro plugs that you'll see here on the receiver are all, they're called JST 1.25 millimeter plugs, right? So JST 1.25 millimeter, you can find all sorts of different adapters and whatever on Amazon. You can find 3-pin, 4-pin, 5-pin, whatever you want, extensions, just bare leads. So I bought a bunch of these little extensions, right? Because it's cool they have a male and a female. So you can see this is a 3-pin, this is a 4-pin, which I'm using for the brake lights, because remember, the brake light one is a 4-pin plug, whereas the headlight is a 3-pin. Your fog lights are 2-pin, right? So you can get a whole bunch of variety of these on Amazon, again, for, you know, 5, 6, 7 bucks for a whole pack of them. So buying this stuff, these little plugs, and buying these, you're able to basically redo all of the wiring on the truck and all of the headlights and do whatever you want, right? So once you understand what the schematic works and what does what, you really have no limit as to what you can do. You can do hazard lights, you can do tail lights at all times, you can do separate backup lights. Again, you know, just figuring out the right voltage and the right plugs that you need, and, you know, just take your time and you can do whatever you want. The other, for the channel 4 interface, so a lot of these other aftermarket lights, they use this type of plug here, right? I think this is a 2.54 millimeter DuPont, I think they called it, right? And so these are cool little adapters, right? So they convert from the micro JST 1.25 millimeter to these plugs, which you see on a lot of aftermarket lights, right? And this is what you'll see on, get a better view of that. There you go, there's 3 pins in there. And so this little guy is plugged in directly into here. And then from here, I have a splitter, a Y. You can't see it because it's all bundled together. It's basically just takes this, splits it into 2. One goes for the rock lights, the other one goes for the roof light bar. And all of that goes into this channel 4 here directly, all right? And then, you know, again, to do the headlights, took this little 3-pin guy, cut off the end over here, and then that gets plugged in there, and then all of the LEDs all just connect to that right there. Taillights, again, same concept, using the 4-pin, plugs in there, and then I'm just connected to the corresponding pins, right? So we saw positive and then 2 ground signals for the lights. And that's pretty much it. You know, that's kind of what it really entails to really modify the wiring on the lighting on these trucks and take it to the next level, right? Because they're you know, you got a lot of features from the factory, but there's a lot of stuff that you can't do because of that voltage limitation. All right, so that kind of covers the electrical and wiring mods that I wanted to discuss. Let's see what else we have going on here in the guts. So, transmission. These are fun little trucks, but you know, I think the second day after owning it, I blew the low gear on the transmission. Right, so the plastic gear stripped out, and I wasn't even doing anything crazy. I actually had the truck indoors. I was just climbing over some of my kids' toys in the living room, and it just stripped out completely. So, after reading some feedback, a lot of folks recommend this generic metal transmission on Amazon. It's like $35-40, and put that in. It's been working great. It's just a little loud, right? But it's all solid metal, you know, metal gears, and I've been thrashing on it. It's been holding up great. Let's see what else. The shocks again. So Injora 53mm shocks meant for the TRX4M. These are some 3D printed shock keys made by JoRC. He sells these on Etsy. They're about $8-10 for the set of 4. And these are nice because they give you a lot of shock mounting options, right? So you see all the different holes and positions. I did a lot of testing with the shocks and, you know, with the body on and off, and it seemed like that position there with the 53mm shocks was just about perfect in terms of up travel and down travel, right? So that kind of gives me all of the up travel I need without having to sacrifice the body too much. I don't want to cut away too much of the body, and I get plenty of down travel, right? Because when the body is on the truck, it's kind of riding like almost here, right? It's almost at full compression, it's just a tiny bit, right? But you know, that gives me enough up travel and down travel, and that seemed to work out well. One thing that is kind of a challenge with these is that the shock sits very close to this little bracket, and it sort of tends to bind. So I did get a bunch of these spacers. These are also made by Injora. They sell these on Amazon, a bunch of different lengths and diameters, and it just goes right in there and lets you space the body, the shock away from the mount, and to avoid any binding. And you can see I actually have another one on the bottom there. There you go. So again, to space it out again, because the shocks were just way too close and I didn't like how the angle was, so I did that. Also have one up on the front. Let's see if you can see it here on this side. So again, to move it a little bit away from the post, and that's pretty much it in terms of shock mounts. Let's see. The lower links are Batrazzi brass links. So these are really cool. You know, solid brass. One of the things that I did not like is, if I can get this thing to sit up, is they come with these little O-rings that hold everything in place. And, you know, as great as the links are, the way that they're mounted are really poor, because these O-rings will just pop out. The link is not going to go anywhere, but it's just kind of flopping back and forth all over the place. So one thing I did find is these little E-clips on Amazon. So you can buy these variety packs that have just a dozen of different sizes of these little circlips and E-clips, and I think these were the 3 or 4 millimeter inner diameter, and they worked out perfect. So that just that's what I did there to secure the Batrazzi link in place, and does not bind, right? So it still gives it full range of motion, and that just keeps them in place without them popping out from those O-rings. Let's see what else we got underneath. Injora drive shafts, metal drive shafts again. So when I blew the low gear on the transmission, I also happened to strip out the splines on the rear drive shaft, so that was fun. Injora brass portal covers, front and rear. I have these NexxSpeed anodized red aluminum C knuckles. Just give it a little bit of splash of color. Don't really need those at all, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with the factory ones, but did find those look a little cooler. All right, so let's get back to the steering. All right, so as mentioned earlier, I'm using an NSDRC RS100 micro server. I am using the supplied aluminum horn that they sent, right? And so in order to make this mounting work, I'm using this RampCrab servo mount. So I try to use a different one made by Trio or some other companies, and they don't have a lot of variability. This is the one that I found that has the most, which would work great, right? So this one, it's got a couple of different mounting options. You can either move this thing back to another hole down here, and you have 3 positions for the servo. So you got 1, 2, 3, and then you can move this thing back as well. So this again is the one that I found that gives you the most flexibility. And in order to make it work the way I have everything set up with these Injora steering links, I'm using on the highest mounting hole and the most forward position, right? And so in order to align everything correctly, I did use a tiny little spacer. Let me see if I can show it to you here. another little tiny Injora spacer right there to sort of move this thing back, and then I'm using another one here to raise the drag link ever so slightly, because without this spacer there was a lot of an angle here, and I didn't like the you know, at full turn there was a lot of, not binding, but I just didn't like the pressure that was being put on these little joints. So again, I spaced this up and I spaced it back just a tad, and so everything works great, right? You know, so I have no clearance issues at full turn. Let's go show you. So there's full lock on this side. It just barely kisses the mount there. You see, but yeah, it doesn't cause any issues. And then full lock on the other side. You know, a lot of clearance there, so there's no problem at all there. And so what I struggle with so much is that these Injora steering links are really beefy, right? From this part here, right? So they're quite thick, and it was causing a lot of issues in terms of alignment and just getting everything to fit. So probably wouldn't have the issue if I used either the stock links or different links, but that's why I had to go through so much work to align this thing correctly. But so far everything's been working great. You know, no other clearance issues. Even as high as this thing sits, it still, you know, fully tucks up. You know, you can see the, let me see, flip this around. Those shocks are fully compressed, right? So they'll get full compression, and you know, this thing will go up as high as it needs to. So yeah, highly recommend these little RS100 micro servos if you're looking for a replacement. It's pretty much as plug and play as you can get. You know, I did use this kind of the same little adapter that I showed you for the lights. So these are also made by RampCrab. You can buy a whole pack of them, like a 10-pack, really cheap on Amazon, and that's what I use to connect it. All right, and aside from that, no other real mods needed to make it work. All right, here's some video of the steering up in the air. Very fast. I think it's a lot quieter too. It's a different type of noise than a factory servo. It's very quick and snappy, and you do want to make sure you pay attention to the trims as well once you start changing, you know, links and servos and whatnot, because this thing has a lot of power and it'll rip your knuckles right off. And so let me see if I can show you an example of that. So that's kind of where I have it maxed out. See, just as it starts to kiss the inside of the knuckle, and on this side it's kind of less of a clearance issue, but you know, kind of the same concept, right? You want to sort of watch it. There we go. So it stops right before it makes contact with the knuckle. All right, I want to show a demo of the steering trim and what happens if you don't have it adjusted correctly. So start to turn this thing, and you'll see that's where I have it stopped. But if you see, if I increase the trim, you can see that lever just starts to put on the knuckle and that bolt, right? It just starts to really tweak and distort everything, because again, there's a lot of strength in this little servo. So I increased the trim right about there. So that's kind of the max that I have, right? So right before it starts to mess with anything. So again, you know, something very important to watch out for, and you can do that with your via the remote. You know, directly on the remote itself, you have the steering trim button, so it's very easy to adjust. Well, that is it. That is all I have for the time being. So again, you know, after owning this thing for a little bit over a month, I put quite a bit of work into it, and hopefully this will be helpful for some other folks. Again, when I was looking around, I wasn't able to find a lot of information on these trucks online. You know, a lot of just very basic stuff, you know, wheels, bumpers, and shocks and whatnot. So I do want to dive a little bit deeper into the electronics of this thing. Next step, if I ever do decide to do more work, it's probably going to be a brushless setup. You know, maybe something like from a Hobby Wing 2-in-1 combo, right? With the brushless setup, might do something like that. But then, you know, it's kind of a bummer, and then I got to figure out how to do the lights all over again, because, you know, these are all 3-volt lights. These are, you know, higher voltage as well, so I'll probably have to redo the headlights and the taillights, and I don't really want to have to go down that route. So for now, I'm enjoying the truck the way it works. Performs pretty well, and, you know, hopefully have some more content on this thing soon. Thanks, guys.